Mische hafo eshlen, mochs vadin yes mikedi, oh ich julin lecht, hiri
One is, if you like, and not to be too grandiose about the geopolitical significance, but particularly the geographical significance of Tyrone, because I think it's important in this particular discussion about what happened. Secondly, there is something that we could refer to as the rule of law and its significance in this, and then I'll just refer to the events of the evening and how I see them unfolding and their significance in the entire event. Geographically, the significance of Tyrone is that it's west of the Bann. If you can think of the 6 counties, it's rural, it's quite large, and its geography means that it's lying adjacent on one side to Donegal, southern or Republic of Ireland. To its southern frontiers, you come across County Monaghan. Moreover, ever since the state was set up in 1922, since partition was put in, or 21, since partition was put in place, there has been a Catholic, nationalist, republican, whatever term you wish to use, majority in County Tyrone and its neighbouring county of Fermanagh. The significance of that is that Tyrone, which historically has been has had a militant republican tradition from at least the 1880s. Tom Clark was active along with the great-grandfather of Maria here, Willie John Kelly, in Dungannon in the late 19th century, and thereafter there was a strong militant republican tradition in that county. But because of its geographical location, because there was a nationalist majority, it never felt itself under the type of surrounding threat or immediate danger that areas in Belfast. It couldn't be surrounded quite so easily. It had a majority. It felt a lot more confident just because of its size, just because of its location, and because of the proximity of Donegal and Monaghan, where there was, if you like, an escape valve or a release valve or a run back. It didn't find itself threatened to the same extent that areas, for example, if you're taking the markets in Belfast, the Short Strand in Belfast, Ardoyne in Belfast, all of those areas are surrounded and to some greater or lesser extent have long felt themselves to be vulnerable because of numbers, because of their location. And overall, the nationalist republican population of Belfast is a minority. It's actually slightly changing at the moment, but for many years it was a small minority, finding itself very much under threat. That never was quite the same in Tyrone, so it was a much more confident, assertive type of republicanism that you found in Tyrone, and because of its location, very often found itself, if you like, and sometimes likened, if you can think of the relationship between Dublin and Cork, that it felt itself almost capable of standing separate from the rest. Now, that doesn't mean it's better or worse, it just simply means that geography, history, population-wise, it occupied a position. And as you moved into the 1970s, politically, some significance emerged in the Tyrone County Fermanagh area. These were counties that had, from the 1920s, elected Sinn Féin TDs. In the 1950s, Tyrone, both the Fermanagh South Tyrone constituency, that was later to elect Bobby Sands, elected an IRA prisoner, Phil Kelly, from the Crumlin Road Jail. And in mid-Ulster, it elected Tom Mitchell, who also was at the time in the Crumlin Road Jail. And Tom, thankfully, is still alive and well and living out in Sutton today. But this area had a tradition of not only militant republicanism, it had a comfortable majority. Geographically, it felt itself relatively safe, and it was rural, and moreover, politically, it had that confidence. Now, come the late part of the 1970s, there was a challenge to the electoral hegemony of the SDLP, in the Fermanagh Tyrone constituency. And Austin Curry of the SDLP stood against a man called Frank Maguire. Maguire was from Fermanagh. Maguire had been peripheral to the Brookborough raid in '56, was, if you like, trusted within Republican circles and stood against Austin Curry and defeated Austin Curry for the parliamentary seat of Fermanagh South Tyrone, indicating that here was an area where, in a head-to-head fight between a Republican candidate, albeit not a Sinn Féin per se, he wasn't an abstentionist, but he was standing clearly as a Republican, and had been endorsed quietly by both O'Grady and O'Connell to do so, beat and defeated Austin Curry. And that was a very significant political statement coming out of the Tyrone-Fermanagh area. Now, and this is by no means to cast any aspersions on Armagh, but the South Armagh area, while it had a very, very effective operational military unit, still found itself in electoral terms electing the SDLP person Seamus Mallon, and right for years even after the ceasefire. So politically and electoral terms, a constituency that was both steeped in its militant republicanism but also had an electoral base. Now that's what I would suggest is the geopolitical significance of Tyrone when we move into a situation where by the early to mid-80s there was by the middle to early to middle 80s, it's now becoming evident that there was an emerging view emerging within senior Republican circles whether there should be a change of direction in terms of the military campaign. In other words, what would be in wider political terms described perhaps as hawks and doves. Politically, if it was a question of political influence between Armagh and Tyrone, the two main sources of the campaign, politically the difference was that Tyrone was electing Republicans. One that had elected Frank Maguire, but then most notably in 1981 they elected Bobby Sands, followed after that by Owen Cairn, his electioneering agent. So you were seeing this starting to emerge. That's the geopolitical background to it. And we consider that when you're considering putting yourself in the position of British intelligence, British military, the British state, when they have found out information that there is a divergence of opinions within the Republican leadership, whether they should persist with an armed campaign or opt for a ceasefire and different strategies. On the evening that the station, the RUC police station barracks at Loughall was a temporary installation. It was not occupied on a 24-hour basis. By the notice board on the front of the station normally would have closed at 7 o'clock. It was a 2-hour session on a Friday evening, 5 o'clock to 7. So the point I'm making, the IRA arrived after 7:30. Now that's very important. Nobody's claiming, or I would never claim for one moment, that the IRA armed and disciplined were not prepared to engage or were not willing to kill the enemy had they encountered them. But it's just a simple fact that they arrived half an hour after the station would normally have closed. So there, for those that insist or say that the IRA arrived intending on killing the occupants, it's just simply not true, for the simple reason that they believed there was nobody in the station. Secondly, the station was what you might call a soft-shelled installation. Unlike other stations, other barracks around the 6 counties, it didn't have a reinforced roof. It had simply slates and hardboard, just the same way you would have it, same type of roof you would have at home. And the significance, in my opinion, of that is that at that time the IRA was regularly using what is being described as a 56-pound mortar. In other words, steel canister weighing 56 pounds with explosives contained in it, and on a number of occasions had inflicted fatal casualties on the British and RUC by dropping these on stations. The British Army was informed at least 48 hours before the IRA operation. And I know that because there was a interrupted inquest hearing in Craigavon. Both Mairead and Colin and Rushin, we were all at it. And one of the British soldiers that was present that night said he had been briefed 48 hours before. That's not a secret. It's said in public court. The British intelligence and the British Army knew exactly the nature of the attack. They knew the nature of the attack, that they knew that there could not be or would not be a mortar attack, which they couldn't have, unless they had intimate information about the attack. They couldn't assume that there wasn't going to be a mortar attack because they placed their radio operators and other police officers inside the station. No even military person with the modest amount of experience would put personnel inside a soft shell building if they expected or even thought that there was the possibility of that type of an attack. So they had to know there wasn't going to be that type of an attack. They also had to know that any detonation would come at one end of the building, or otherwise there could have been massive casualties on their behalf, so they knew where to stand. But in all of this, the point is furthermore that whenever the IRA attacked, it was supposed to be an empty station, that from at least 6 different positions the British Army opened fire. Now, all 8 IRA volunteers died. If you look through the report from various actually British government sources, their HET, their inquests, but particularly the HET, that's the Historical Inquiries Team, you will find the British Army reporting on a number of occasions that they had saw movement of one of the volunteers on 3 different occasions, at least, volunteer lying down and fearing for their lives. They then fired several other rounds. And I'll come back to that and the significance of that in a minute. The other point I'll make is that there was, in that ambush, approximately 600 to 700 rounds fired by the British. The SAS, and this can be something of a misleading, in my opinion, a confusing, misleading piece of information about the Special Air Service Regiment. The Special Air Service Regiment has a certain amount of training, but any regiment of the British Army, including what was then the Ulster Defence Regiment, has experts of the same calibre. Any regiment of the British Army could have provided 35 to 40 men who would have carried out the same type of operation. The idea that the SAS is specifically instructed to shoot to kill is also misleading, because any soldier in any army, in any part of the world, is instructed to fire to kill. You don't instruct a soldier to fire to do anything other than to kill. And when you stop to think of it, it makes common sense. In a combat situation, you can't tell a soldier to fire at your foot, or fire for your hand, or fire to kill. But what you do not tell him to do, under any circumstances, is when someone is disabled, to then finish them off, because that's qualitatively different. You might remember within the last few months, a British soldier was actually released from custody in Britain. Mistake, from his point of view, of leaving his helmet camera running, where he executed a wounded and disabled Taliban fighter. It wasn't that he had opened fire on the Taliban fighter, it was that the Taliban fighter was incapacitated and he then finished the guy off. Why the SAS? I have said this before. The locally recruited Ulster Defence Regiment would have provided exactly the same calibre of gunman, would have done the same job with even greater relish. The main difference is that the SAS is a very small section of the British Army. It's not particularly trained to kill any more than any other element of the British Army, but what it is capable of doing is when it does kill, it keeps its mouth closed. It doesn't give interviews to the press, it doesn't give interviews to the television, it doesn't talk. Had the Ulster Defence Regiment done it, you could assume that some 2, 3, 4, 5 UDR personnel would have talked widely, or any other regiment of the British Army couldn't have held their tongue, they would have had to report, and that's where the looseness would have come out, because they couldn't have been instructed to kill all without telling. And the point then is that, and this is where we come into what I describe as the rule of law. There's only 2 rules of law apply to a conflict situation. One is the Geneva Convention. The other is the common rule of law. The fact remains that 6 counties was and is technically, constitutionally, a part of the United Kingdom. And as part of the United Kingdom, if there's not a war, all operatives of the Crown are bound by the rule of law. So, if you take it this way, and this I think is what we have to look at, that if, for example, and let's look at a police officer, or for that matter down this side of the border, a Garda officer, if they are entitled, according to the chain of command, to carry a firearm, there's several circumstances in which they're entitled to use their firearm and use it lethally. If someone fires on a police officer or a guard, they're perfectly entitled, under the rule of law, to use their firearm to defend their life and to return fire and fire lethally. If they believe their life is in danger, they're entitled to do the same. They're entitled to do the same if they believe a member of the public's life is in danger. They're entitled to do the same. And within reason, that's understandable. But what a cop is not entitled by law to do is to decide that, for example, if someone has been, for example, committed some offence, a police officer isn't entitled to sentence them to jail or to sentence them to death. We don't have the death penalty either, north or south anyway. But if the police officer returns fire and his target goes down, he's lying incapacitated on the ground, a police officer can't walk up and put his pistol to the man's head or woman's head and fire a couple of rounds into it to finish them off. That then becomes murder. The point I'm making here is when you have 8 out of 8 fatal casualties, where there's a 9th casualty, and the circumstances clearly suggest, because the 9th civilian casualty was wearing a blue boiler suit, as were the other members of the IRA, with one possible exception. I'll not confuse the issue by going into this, but it's my opinion that the SAS team was instructed to leave all IRA operatives dead. No questions, leave them all dead. And for that reason, those that were incapacitated were finished off. And that's why we come across in the HCT report this covering story. I thought I saw movement, I feared my life was in danger, and I opened fire. Now, when someone's been hit even once with a high velocity round, a high velocity round inflicts enormous damage on the body, traumatic damage on the body. You might see films, you might see films of people being shot and they stagger and they go around a dramatic sort of a high velocity round takes a person off their feet unbelievably fast. The body goes into shock. Even if you're only hitting the arm, if you're hitting the leg, the body goes into shock. Your ability after being hit 2 or 3 times to gather up a weapon and pose a threat is not credible. It's not credible that it would happen 3 times. It's not credible that when you think of the number of rounds that some bodies can take, that out of the 8 members of the IRA, that 8 were dead on admission to hospital. That is a highly unlikely event to happen. So what we're saying here is that word come down that all were to be executed, none were to be left alive. And then we look at the reason behind it, and the reason behind it, I would suggest, was that it was to send a message of shock and awe to the Republican community on one hand, and also to set in motion a chain of events that would remove Tyrone as a potential block to the emerging ceasefire. So it was designed to do that, and arguably may have done it effectively. But these are points that when we talk about the situation overall, I think we've got to then look at it under those circumstances. We have to say that in terms of the rule of law, that if the British state decided that it would move beyond the rule of law and would not observe the rule of law, the point then becomes one of that if those who make the law, and keep in mind that the British government made the rules through Parliament, set the rules down, so those, when someone who makes the rules breaks the rules, someone who makes the law breaks the law, there is no law. And then we're asking the question, well then, by what right had the British to decide that they had an entitlement to enforce the law if they didn't observe the law that they made themselves? There's a host of questions surround that. But what I think we do come back to is this, that we're looking at a situation where the British state decided to use massive force to achieve a political objective, breaking their own rules, breaking the law that they themselves had created, and proclaim that they're enforcing, and are very loud in their protest about their observation of the rule of law. I don't imagine that I'm shocking anybody here by highlighting the hypocrisy of the British state, nor am I shocking anybody or surprising anybody by talking about the brutality and the viciousness of the British state. But I think we've got to look at that and the callousness and the ruthlessness with which they decided to enforce their will. This is something that has been experienced throughout the Empire, the British Empire, something that continues, because this hasn't stopped in the six counties. We're seeing the exact same thing emerging in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're seeing the same as in their approach to Libya or elsewhere, or Syria. So we're talking about an imperial power using force to achieve a political objective. And I think we've got to look at that today, not just in what happened 30 odd years ago, which is still important, it's still essential, but to think in terms of today and where this empire is engaging, along with other imperial powers. To think of what's happening when the British state engages with the US state, with the European Union, when it starts to apply the same logic across the world in its drive to control the world and its wealth. We're seeing a microcosm of its behaviour in the six counties, and on that particular occasion, which wasn't alone. And there are several other instances which we're not necessarily going to talk about tonight, but if you look at an incident such as, for example, the Gibraltar shootings, it was a similar situation, similar message being sent out, where there was no rationale for what happened apart from sending a message, and in violation of the rule of law which they have.
Inviting us to speak tonight, and it's a very hard act to follow on from Tommy, but I'm Maria Kelly, I have my sister Roisin with me. My brother Patrick was one of the men that was killed that night, and I'm really going to be talking about the campaign that myself and Roisin run, and we set up the campaign in 1995, and the reason behind it was we went to the inquest, which was 8 years after the men were killed, and I'd really be honest if I say up until that inquest we probably looked at what happened that night as simply as one army fighting another army, and the army that was better equipped and had more men won. And I don't think that would be wrong to say that that would be the view of most families. But what transpired from the inquest on the first day, the investigating officer who was brought to the scene to actually do up a report on what happened, he was questioned by our barrister who got the information out of him that it was the SAS that night, and it was also declared that at least, as Tommy said, 48 hours. Now I think probably over the years we could say safely that it could have been 5 to 6 weeks that they knew that this attack was going to take place. And we stayed for a day and a half at the inquest, and the reason we left, a lot of people think we should have stuck it out, but we were in an unfortunate position that our barrister wasn't given the papers before the witness was called to the stand, and it's almost impossible to quickly read down through a statement and then cross-examine somebody. And we decided we'd go for a judicial review, but the coroner decided that the inquest would proceed without us. So we left after the first day and a half, and the inquest, I think it only took three days. It started on the 30th of May and finished on the 2nd of June. And at that stage the inquest was purely, did it say who the men were, which obviously we all knew, where they were killed, Loughall, and how they died, which it just reported they died by gunshot. And I know Rushing and myself and my father and another sister were going home from the inquest after the second day, and we had been able to view the photographs of the men as they were killed, what would be their autopsy photographs. And I know when we were in the car, our view was this wasn't simply somebody getting shot once or twice. The brutality of the injuries was something that it's actually really hard to get that picture out of your mind, but you get a certain determination that somebody has to be held accountable for that. And we met with a group known as the Committee on the Administration of Justice, which is a civil and human rights group, and they had sent observers to the inquest. Their view was straight away that there'd been a breach of human rights that night, and we wouldn't get justice here, and to take the case to the European Court of Human Rights. We have representatives from each of the 9 families, that's including the civilian family, and we went to Europe. In 2001, the European Court ruled that Article 2 had been breached, which is the right to life, and it's a judgment that has been used in a multitude of cases all across Europe. What it ruled on was what they termed the procedural wrongs, and that meant that there hadn't been a full, proper, independent investigation. The initial investigation was carried out by the RUC. There were 3 RUC men in the barracks that night, and one of them was a local RUC man who would have been stationed in Loughall. The other 2 come from Mahon Road Station, and they're part of this HMSU. The European Court ruled that these were domestic issues, and the case has still been monitored in Europe by the Committee of Ministers, and that happens once to twice a year. And what they do is they're trying to make sure that the British implement all the failings to correct them that happened that night. And there has been, probably the most important thing has been the overturn of the inquest system, which at the minute is an Article 2 compliant one, where the soldiers can be brought into the inquest and cross-examined. There's full disclosure, and the problem with the full disclosure is in 2014, it started in 2012 after we got the HET report, which was another long process, but this was recommended by the British government to the European Commission that this would be a remedy for us to have a full independent investigation. And the problem with that was, and we did have a lot of issues, and some families didn't want to engage in the process, but myself and Rushing have always been of the opinion that unless you do something, you can't really criticise it, because it's easy. And they had a lot of feelings, and it was proven they had a lot of feelings, but our attitude was that we needed to be part of it to prove that it wasn't working, and that the process that we did with the HET has actually been a very useful one. And there's a lot of information there that wasn't actually declared in the report, but as most people know, in the last 6 months there has been some disclosure given to the legal teams, and there's a lot of information there that we didn't know. They did, as Tommy said, shoot people who were already severely injured. They shot, the only evidence that has been recorded by the British state is that Seamus Donnelly, who was only 19, was shot at close range and had the evidence of that. But their definition of close range is something that actually we were really astounded by, because they said it'll only be recorded as close range if it's less than 3 foot. But 3 foot is actually quite close. So anybody that was shot at 3.5 foot, it's not close range. We, as I say, we went through the HET process. We got the report and we disowned the report, to be honest, because there was a lot of things in it that didn't tally with the evidence that we already had. And we were in the process of getting this reviewed because the HET had come under a lot of criticism for the way they were investigating cases where the state had been involved. And we got a couple of new guys, but they were still, they weren't police that were stationed here or served here. There were ones from England, and they they went through the process of re-investigating what the original HET had done. And then we had this crowd, the HMIC, which is, they overlook investigations carried out by, it was the HET that was investigating. And what happened was they actually in 2013 they actually put out a very damning report about the HET and how it didn't handle cases where the state was involved impartially. So we kind of were back to square one then. So what we did was we withdrew our support from the HET, and we were trying to find what other avenue we could go down. So we turned then to a legal process, which was to ask for a fresh inquest, which took a couple of years. And what has happened in the Loughall case since we started was that as soon as we get close to something, the British step in and they try to do something to block where we are. So the Attorney General, which is John Larkham up in Belfast, he was making a ruling on whether we would get a fresh inquest, and he applied to the NIO and the Secretary of State, which was Teresa Villiers at the time, to see if they had any evidence there that he might not have got. And straight away there was what is called a national security sensitive certificate issued, which the Loughall case is actually the only case that has a national security certificate, a national security sensitive certificate. You hear a lot about PIICs, which are public interest immunity certificates. The Loughall case has never actually had one of those issued, but the Secretary of State decided that she would take the power from the Attorney General, who is supposed to be independent and is seen as independent. I think they worried about maybe granting us a fresh inquest, and she gave it to the British Advocate General, which is Jeremy Wright, who actually sits on the British Cabinet. He's their legal advisor, but funny thing is he actually granted a fresh inquest, which come as a shock to a lot of people and caused a lot of outrage that we would get it, but you can't get one unless there's points there that haven't been properly investigated. So that was taken in 2015. Jeremy Wright, in September 2015, he actually ruled that we would have a fresh inquest. Then, of course, that didn't block what we were doing, so the next thing, what happened was they decided, the DUP primarily, decided not to agree to funding for these inquests, what comes under an umbrella of legacy cases. And there's in total 97 families, 97 families that are entitled to fresh inquests. And at the minute there's a block on that because funding's not been released. Now we will have an inquest, but the way it is, because there's only 3 coroners, it actually is going to take a long time to get through the cases. So, and you're given a block, maybe 2 or 3 months for a case, because I think the Ballymurphy families actually got a date, which is for next September 2018, and they blocked out 3 months for them. So we will have our inquest, but because this funding has been tied up, because they can't agree on it, we are going to have to wait a while. But basically that's really where we are. We're just, we do meet obstacles, but I think the campaign's actually very strong, and we just are under the opinion all the time that you have to fight, because we just want, as our title says, the truth about what happened that night, which is full disclosure. And it could come back, that maybe there was no alternative. I can see alternatives, but then that's my view on it, and justice means different things to different people. I think my view on justice would be that people are held accountable. I don't think it's practical to think that any of these soldiers are ever going to serve time. I actually think the soldiers on the ground that night followed orders. There are 2 or 3 that maybe stepped outside what they were to do, but generally they would have been following orders from higher up. So we at the minute now are waiting for our inquest to take place, and that inquest now will probably, because it's Article 2 compliant, it probably will be very revealing. And at the minute we're getting some disclosure, but of course they've tied up. I think there's about 30-40 files that have been released to the legal team, and to be honest, it's not really anything significant. There are bits of information that we wouldn't have known.
Mach's vadin yes mikedi, oh ich julin